Part 38. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguangongzi. Chapter 371. The building boat is parked in the Yueyang Tower area, the most prosperous area in Yueyang. The surrounding areas are mostly tourist boats and boats, not docks. The land on the shore is precious, so it is naturally impossible to build a ferry here for people to travel by boat. If you want to turn back from the ferry to the boat, you have to walk nearly 2 miles. When Su Buletinling arrived in Yueyang, he was already targeted by De Yinglu's spies. After discovering that Su Buletinling set off for Junshan Island, De Yinglu, who had been waiting for an opportunity to find a single, naturally took action. The moon is dark, the wind is high, and it rains continuously. Outside Changxingkang, which is still half a mile away from the ferry, Chang Shijian and a tall man stood quietly under the eaves in the rain, looking in the direction of the ferry. Having seen Su Buling's skills at Prince Zhou's mansion, Chang Shijian's expression was solemn, not careless at all, but not nervous. The man next to him was Zhou Yuan, the third master of the Iron Sand sect, one of the 12 sects of the East China Sea. He might not be as good as Zulu, but he was also a long-established master in the world. Chang Shijian himself is not a fish in the world, and he may not be able to defeat Su Buling in a duel, but with him and Zhou Yuan, plus the 6 brave men recruited from Chu, under the encirclement of 8 people, Su Buling can't defeat him in a single fight. I think I have the qualifications to talk about it. Seeing that it was getting dark, Yang Tuyu and others had already put on their night clothes and hid in the warehouse and were ready. Chang Shijian said, "Senior Zhou, please be patient later. Mr. Pei asked us to talk to Su Buling and refused to hand over the jade pendant before doing anything. Su Buling is not an ordinary person. Any action will inevitably cause damage. We should try to avoid it if we can." Zhou Yuan was tall, without a weapon. His hands were full of calluses, and he turned 2 iron walnuts in his hands. Hearing this, he said calmly, "I have my own sense of propriety and won't ruin the big things in the building." Chang Shijian held the hilt of his sword and chuckled, but his eyes were a little uneasy. The 12 sects of the East China Sea and the Lu family of the East China Sea are located on the east and west roads of Shandong. Like the Jianghu forces in other places, they compete for territory and wealth. On the surface, they respect each other like guests, but privately they have countless blood feuds. The reason why the Jianghu forces in the East China Sea formed an alliance, collectively known as the 12 sects of the East China Sea, was to compete with the dominant Donghai Lu family. Even so, they were still suppressed by the Lu family for hundreds of years. It is impossible to count how many ancestors of the Zhou family of Iron Sand sect died at the hands of the Lu family. It was just that they did not have the opportunity and confidence to hold back. Now when Zhou Yuan entered the Eagle Tower, he had a blood feud with the imperial court. When he was on a mission, he happened to bump into the Lu family's nephew, the son of a prince. It was obviously a bit hard to expect him to talk to Su Ling in a friendly manner. Today, Zhou Yuan himself asked for orders to come to block Su Buletinling. I am afraid that he was just seeking revenge for his personal vengeance. Chang Shijian hesitated for a moment, then spoke and warned. The momentum in the building has not yet started, so we can't be too showy. Su Buling's death will definitely anger King Su, and he will definitely not be killed. Senior Zhou must pay attention to his discretion later. Zhou Yuan's eyes were dull. King Su is thousands of miles away from here, so why should we be afraid? Furthermore, this is the territory of King Chu. Su Buletinling will die here. King Su should cause trouble for King Chu. What does it have to do with us? Chang Shijian raised his hand. The gentlemen in the building have their own plans. They want to stir up trouble at will. It will not do any good for me to attack the Eagle Tower. I still follow the instructions. If we can't reach an agreement, I will force Su Buling to hand over the jade pendant. That's it. Zhou Yuan took a breath and said nothing, which was regarded as acquiescence. Behind the wall of Changxingkang, 6 Jianghu people were lying in ambush on the road ahead with weapons in hand. According to the plan, after Su Buling passed by, they blocked the retreat from behind. Daying Tower gained its reputation by killing wolf guards. There was no mob in the building at all. The conditions for recruiting people were not much simpler than the imperial examination. The lowest level was filled with skilled warriors like Wu Yu, a wild Taoist. At this time, none of the 6 Jianghu people ambushed were mediocre. As for the backgrounds of these people, each has its own story, but one thing they have in common is that their families were destroyed by the imperial court. Just like Yang Tuyu lying behind the roof of the warehouse, she was born in the Yang family in Yangzhou. The family was originally a big family in the local area, and the entire world of Yangzhou depended on the Yang family's expression. Yang Tuyu was well dressed and well fed since he was a child. He was also quite talented, and he had gained quite a reputation in the Chu region at the age of 18 or 19. Unexpectedly, when the new king succeeded to the throne, an imperial order came down and the whole world collapsed. If the Yang family did not beg to the court and hand over the family property accumulated by their ancestors, they were accused of being traitors and were massacred by the court. Yang Tuyu desperately escaped and hid in Yueyang, where he was taken in by his wife Meng Hua and barely managed to survive. But all his parents, relatives, friends, houses, and property were wiped out, and he was the only one left in the Yang family. How could he forget this blood feud? Yang Tuyu was not a reckless man, and he could not avenge himself by killing 1 or 2 people. If the court killed his whole family, he would have to destroy the court, so he had been waiting for the opportunity. There are almost no forces in Jianghu who can rebel, and there are not many forces who can go against the imperial court. The only force that can frighten the imperial court is Dainglu of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. After the people from Fighting Tower came to Yueyang, Yang Tuyu immediately contacted the masters in the building through Chen Han, and his extraordinary martial arts also won the respect of Fighting Tower. However, Jianghu people have to submit a name certificate to join the gang. After tonight, they can be regarded as those who beat the Yinglu. Yang Tuyu knew what to do and knew Su Buling's martial arts, but he didn't take it to heart. It didn't matter that Su Buling was better than Lin Yuzong. He was in his early 30s when martial arts were at their most tyrannical. There were other people present. Zhou Yuan, Chang Shijian, and others were confident even if they really took action. As for Su Buling's identity, Yang Tuyu didn't take it seriously. He dared to kill even the emperor in front of him. There was nothing he dared not touch, even a mere vassal prince. Yang Tuyu hid quietly behind the ridge of the roof, staring at the road below. A lantern hung under the eaves of the warehouse, emitting a dim yellow light. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, a white figure appeared in the rain curtain, and the sound of footsteps approaching from far away. Yang Tuyu and others held their breath and remained motionless. The man in white clothes on the road, holding an oil paper umbrella in his right hand and a snow-white sword hanging at his waist, was strolling leisurely. He seemed not to be aware of the ambush around him and walked straight past. The umbrella blocked the view, so the man's face could not be seen clearly, but his tall figure was unmistakable. Chang Shijian and Zhou Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly, and they stepped out at the same time, walking into the rain curtain on Beishi Avenue and standing in the middle of the road. Yang Tuyu and the other 6 followed closely behind, each rushing out from their hiding places and landing at the back of the road, blocking all escape routes. Su Buling held an oil paper umbrella, stopped in the rain, looked back and forth, and spread his hands slightly. "You heroes, are you robbing wealth and sex? The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 372. Su Buling stood in the circle with a calm expression and looked harmless. Chang Shijian was the lobbyist in the building. At this moment, he took a step forward, raised his sword and saluted in the rain. "I'm a regular attendant at Daying Tower. I took the liberty of visiting you." Please don't blame me, Your Majesty. Su Buling looked at it for a moment and nodded gently. I think I met you once in Prince Zhou's mansion. What a coincidence. Chang Shijian still wanted to say a few polite words, but Zhou Yuan next to him stared at the surroundings cautiously and raised his hand. Beware of deceit. Fight quickly and tell it directly. Seeing this, Chang Shijian stopped talking nonsense and said, I came here today because I wanted to ask for something small from the Crown Prince. The ice flower hibiscus pendant in Prince Zhou's hand fell into the Crown Prince's hand. I hope the Crown Prince will give it to me. Su Buling nodded. I thought it was such a big deal. As he spoke, he took off a decorative jade pendant from his waist, held it in his hand and shook it. Is this it? Chang Shijian's eyes were slightly focused, and the jade pendant was always placed in Prince Zhou's hand. There were only a few people who had seen him. That day, he stood outside the main hall and watched, only to see Prince Zhou handing the jade pendant to Su Buling. As for what he looked like, the jade pendants were all the same, so you couldn't tell. Seeing that Su Buling took out the jade pendant, it was probably true. Chang Shijian nodded lightly. Please leave it to me, Your Majesty. He. Su Buling picked up the jade pendant and put it in his hand. After looking at it, he clenched it with his left hand and rubbed it hard a few times, making a clicking sound. Everyone in Daying Tower was filled with astonishment. They didn't expect Su Bulenling to raise his hand and destroy the jade pendant. Chang Shijian's face turned pale, and he raised his hand and shouted angrily, How could you do this? With such a treasure that has been passed down for hundreds of years, you actually... Su Buring opened his palms and looked at the broken jade in his palms. There are many jade pendants at home, so I don't need this one. If you want it, it can be used together. Chang Shijian was furious. The 4 jade articles collected in Dayinglu were of great use. If one piece was destroyed, wouldn't it mean that they would never be able to collect them all? Zhou Yuan, whose eyes darkened slightly, if you dare to spoil my important mission of conquering the Eagle Tower, you are seeking death. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhou Yuan struck preemptively, slamming his feet on the ground to break through the rain curtain, and slapped Su Buling with a pair of iron palms who had not yet drawn his sword. Chang Shijian was confused by Su Buling's sudden destruction of jade. His heart was full of anger, and he did not stop him at the moment. He unsheathed the long sword in his hand and sprinted out. However, Chang Shijian had seen Su Buling's skills. He was careful and deliberately slowed down Zhou Yuan by 2 steps. When the 6 Jianghu people in the rear saw the leader's order to take action, they immediately surrounded him from behind with their weapons in hand without any hesitation. Yang Tuyu was holding a single sword, and as a certificate of admission to the Eagle Tower, he naturally took the lead and rushed to the front. Unfortunately, the next moment, Yang Tuyu understood what King Kui meant. In the rainy night, the sword was unsheathed, and murderous intent rose into the sky. Zhou Yuan suddenly attacked and broke through the rain curtain, and rushed in front of Su Buling in an instant, wanting to knock down the yellow-mouthed kid before Su Buling drew his sword. However, Su Buling didn't draw his sword at all. He held an umbrella in his right hand and threw back a handful of broken jade with his left hand. The sharp sound of breaking the wind was like 100 arrows firing in unison, tearing apart the quiet rain curtain. Ding ding ding. There was a crisp sound of broken jade hitting the sword behind them. The 6 people behind them were caught off guard and raised their swords to block. The 3 who were still unable to avoid were stabbed into their fleshy eyes by the broken jade, and they were instantly blind and pockmarked. Ah! At the same moment as the scream sounded, Su Buling threw his hand forward and swung it forward. His 5 fingers were like hooks and he grabbed Zhou Yuan's palm head-on with terrifying strength. Zhou Yuan's iron sand palm was so good that he could crack open monuments and crack rocks. At this time, he was unafraid and swung out with all his strength. Bang! Both palms met, making a muffled sound. Su Buling didn't even shake his body. He looked at the completely unfamiliar fish in front of him with cold eyes. He suddenly grabbed it with his 5 fingers and pierced the flesh and blood of Zhou Yuan's calloused right hand. The bones were clearly visible, and the bones were broken. Crack. Compared with Su Buletinling's calm and gentle attitude, Zhou Yuan's eyes were filled with astonishment. His palms were like being slapped on the city wall and could not be shaken at all. Knowing that he had kicked the iron plate, he quickly stopped his hand and it was too late to retreat. The severe pain of broken finger bones was already felt, and he couldn't help but let out a groan of pain. The next moment, Su Buling's hand circled up his right arm like a snake. Zhou Yuan recognized it as the eagle claw sex crane catching hand. He immediately lowered his head and tried to hide his throat and use his left hand to block, but he still couldn't. A step slower. Click. Su Buling grabbed Zhou Yuan's neck like a poisonous snake spitting a message, and crushed his throat instantly with his fingers, stopping Zhou Yuan's forward momentum. At the same time, he lifted Zhou Yuan's strong body up and slammed it to the ground. After a muffled sound of bang, the tall man made no movement anymore. To an outsider, this flow of events would look like Zhou Yuan rushed over, was picked up by Su Buling and then fell to the ground, without any buffering at all. At this time, Chang Shijian was still charging forward with the weapon in his hand. When he saw Zhou Yuan suddenly dying on the street in the blink of an eye, unspeakable fear appeared in his eyes. However, after all, Chang Shijian had seen the scene of Su Buling's instant kill master in Prince Zhou's mansion, so he was on guard before coming. If the situation was not good, he threw the scabbard out without any hesitation, turned around and ran away. Su Buling raised his hand to catch the scabbard and did not chase him. He just said coldly, "Tell your master to come by yourself next time." Chang Shijian naturally did not respond and disappeared behind the house on the street in the blink of an eye. Zhou Yuan, who was the main force tonight, was dead in person. Chang Shijian ran away without saying a word, and the remaining people were naturally confused. On the road in the rain, Zhou Yuan's body was motionless, and 3 Jianghu people whose eyes were pierced by broken jade covered their faces and wailed on the ground. Yang Tuyu held a single sword in front of him, and stopped with the other 2 accomplices. Looking at the man in white standing quietly in the rain with an umbrella, his face was already pale. After Su Buling finished speaking, he turned around and looked at the 3 Jianghu people behind him, and said in a cold voice, "One person is enough to go back and report the news. Retreat, go." The 3 finally reacted to the situation, and Yang Tuyu shouted loudly, turned around and ran. Tap tap tap. The 3 people ran wildly, trying to rush into the building complex beside the road. Just as they turned around, there was a sound of breaking wind behind them, and a scabbard was inserted into the back of one of them, blood splashed, and they immediately fell to the street. Hot blood splashed on Yang Tuyu's face. Yang Tuyu's eyes widened, and only trembling remained in his eyes. He listened to the sound and threw the family heirloom sword in the direction of the scabbard, trying to delay a moment to escape. Unfortunately, the thrown sword flew back at a faster speed and chopped another accomplice. Hoo-hoo! Yang Tuyu's mind was blank. His instinct for survival made him realize that running away was useless. He rushed forward and picked up the long sword in his accomplice's hand from the ground. He turned over and wanted to fight to the death. However, just as he stood up from the rain, Zhou Yuan's body was kicked in front of him. Bang! After a muffled sound, Yang Tuyu and the body were directly placed on the wall of the warehouse, shaking off the tiles on the wall. Su Buling held an oil paper umbrella, slightly tilted his head to avoid the flying sword, raised his hand to grab the hilt, and walked towards the wall. Yang Tuyu coughed violently, and pushed the corpse away with all his strength, trying to climb up by supporting the wall. Just when he had half of his body up, the tall man holding an umbrella had already walked in front of him, and the tip of the bloody sword pointed at his throat. Before death, Time always becomes very long. Yang Tuyu's panic suddenly calmed down at this moment, and all emotions dissipated, leaving only one thought: I should listen to the advice and not go out tonight. But at this time, regret is obviously useless. Yang Tuyu raised his hand without any hesitation and blurted out. Spare my life. Don't kill me. Su Buling's sword stopped at Yang Tuyu's throat and he tilted his head slightly. Will begging for mercy work? Yang Tuyu knew that begging for mercy was useless, but he didn't want to die, he couldn't die, and he had a family to take care of, so he could only pray with his eyes. I still have a family, spare my life. Su Buling's eyes were cold. I also have a family. When you came to kill me, did you think about me? If I begged for mercy, would you let me go? Yang Tuyu breathed heavily, opened his mouth, but had nothing to say, just gritted his teeth and said. Spare my life, I can't die yet. There was a moment of silence in the rainy night. After Su Buling looked at her for a few times, he inserted the sword in front of Yang Tuyu and turned to walk towards the ferry. Yang Tuyu breathed heavily and was a little unbelievable. After a little hesitation, he climbed up and climbed over the wall and ran towards the back alley. After a while, the sound of gongs and drums rang out, and the government's constables came in the rain and took away the corpses on the ground and the still wailing minions. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 373. Earlier, on the stone arch bridge near the ferry. Su Buling suddenly stopped, raised his hand and hugged Ning Yuhi tightly in his arms, leaning down hard. Aling don't do this. Ning Yuhi threw herself into Su Buling's arms and panicked. She thought that her apprentice was lustful and wanted to take advantage of her in this place where no one was around. In her shame, anger, and panic, she didn't dare to resist. But at the moment of being pressed down, Ning Yuhi suddenly saw the oil paper umbrella above being cut neatly, and the ribs of the umbrella broke silently, as if the breeze swept through and blew it off, and even the weapon was not seen. The sudden strange scene frightened Ning Yuhi's hair stood on end, knowing that she had encountered an assassination. If Su Buling hadn't held her and forced her to bend down and lean over to avoid it, the two of them would have been hit. Ning Yuhi's eyes suddenly became sharp, and she grabbed the long sword at her waist. She glanced around, but found no trace of the enemy. Su Buling was also shocked and angry. Although his six senses were sharp and he noticed something was wrong, he didn't see clearly what cut the umbrella. Ding! The slight sound like plucking the strings of a zither sounded again in the night, almost inaudible under the cover of the surging river. Su Buling drew the long sword from his waist and held it in front of him by feeling. The next moment, two sparks burst out from the sharp sword blade, as if something was cut off, and the sound of the strings breaking also sounded. Su Buling knew that there was a trap on the bridge. He hugged Ning Yuhi and kicked sideways, kicking the guardrail of the stone arch bridge. The stone guardrail broke immediately and fell into the river below. A series of broken strings sounded, and there were several pieces of broken stones hanging in the air. Obviously, something inside the iron wire was tied to it. The fence of the stone bridge was broken, and the trap set in advance was naturally destroyed. It was so dark that he couldn't see the surroundings clearly. Su Buling stood there with his ears slightly moving, carefully distinguishing the imperceptible sounds in the rain and water. Ning Yuhi looked cautiously, holding a long sword and leaning on Su Buling's back, paying attention to the back. Even his breathing was barely audible. The rain was drizzling, and the stone arch bridge was a little weirdly quiet. It seemed that he had just accidentally stepped on a trap, and there were no hunters around. Let's go. Su Buling was not careless at all. He and Ning Yuhi stood back to back and slowly moved under the stone arch bridge. As soon as he took a step, he heard the sound of clothes breaking in the wind under the broken guardrail. Swoosh! Ning Yuhi turned his head quickly, pointing the blade of his sword in the direction of the sound, and saw a fiery red shadow rushing up from the edge of the stone bridge. The speed was extremely fast, and the figure's face was pale. In the dim light, it could be seen that it was a hideous and terrifying ghost face, with empty eyes and 2 blood stains. Under the red embroidered robe, he held 2 daggers and rushed directly towards the 2 people, making a sharp whistle. Such a terrifying and horrifying scene frightened Su Buling, who had never believed in ghosts and gods. Ning Yuhi was directly frightened and screamed, raising his hand and stabbing the face of the figure with a sword. Su Buling secretly thought that it was not good, and it was too late to raise his hand to stop it. He could only raise his hand to hold Ning Yuhi and dodge to the side. As expected, after the long sword pierced into the ghost face exploded directly, bursting out a ball of lime powder. The 2 were attracted by the ghost that suddenly appeared in front of them, and they didn't notice that a shadow in a nightgown appeared on the stone bridge behind them. There was no sound when they moved, and they appeared at the same time as the ghost in front. When Su Buling pulled Ning Yuhi away to avoid the lime powder, the black figure approached quietly like a ghost, and stabbed the backs of the 2 with 2 black daggers. Ning Yuhi closed his eyes to prevent the lime powder from flying into his eyes, and he didn't understand what was going on. Su Buling saw the trick of making a feint to the east and attacking the west. Although he didn't hear the sound, he could see where his blind spot was based on the current situation. The moment he pounced on Ning Yuhi, he didn't care if there was anyone behind him, and he turned back and chopped his back with a sword. Ding! The sound of metal clashing sounded, and the long sword chopped something. Su Buling let go of Ning Yuhi, and the moment he forced the assassin away with his sword, he turned around and stood up again to face behind him. The long sword in his hand was still trembling, and he vaguely saw the black shadow in the rain jumping off the stone bridge. Su Buling's body was as fast as lightning. He flashed behind the black shadow and thrust out a sword, but only pierced the corner of his clothes. He leaned forward to chase him, and another sound of a zither string sounded. Su Buling was full of astonishment. He quickly raised his head and stepped back. This time, he finally saw the black thin line flashing past his eyes and cutting off a few hairs. Ling-er! Ning Yuhi was frightened and turned pale. He wanted to run over to help. Su Buling didn't hear the sound of falling into the water, so he secretly thought it was not good. He turned around and saw that the elusive black shadow really rushed towards Ning Yuhi from the other side of the stone arch bridge. Be careful! In just a few steps, he didn't have time to return to help. Su Buling raised his hand and threw the long sword out, trying to block the black shadow. Ning Yuhi was also a master of martial arts. Seeing Su Buling's eyes, he understood. The long sword in his hand turned over and stabbed from under the sleeves at a tricky angle to the back. He used the hidden sword style that the Tang family was famous for. Ding ding! After 2 light sounds, a dagger was knocked away by the long sword, and another dagger clamped Ning Yuhi's sword. The black shadow might be the strongest one among those Su Buling had fought. His movements were so fast that only an afterimage was left. While holding the long sword, he slapped Ning Yuhi's back with his backhand. Ning Yuhi didn't have time to turn around, so he could only bend forward to dodge. Su Buling's footsteps were extremely fast. He had already rushed to the front and raised his arm to block the black shadow's arm, but the force was too strong and it still rubbed Ning Yuhi's shoulder, causing Ning Yuhi to stagger. Su Buling pulled Ning Yuhi behind him with his left hand, and with his right hand, he tried to grab the black shadow's arm, but he only grabbed the sleeve. The black shadow held the dagger in his right hand, but he slashed directly at Su Buling's throat. In the blink of an eye, Su Buling leaned back to avoid it, and the dagger swept past his chin, and punched out with his hand, hitting the black shadow's chest. The black shadow's reaction was not at all satisfied, and the dagger missed and hit Su Buling's chest with his elbow. Bang. The two exchanged moves, making a muffled sound. Su Buling's chest felt like being hit by a wild bull, and he took 3 steps back before he could stabilize his body, and his chest was churning. However, he was born with an inhuman physique, and although this was a bit fierce, he could completely withstand it. The Black Shadow forcibly changed his moves, obviously underestimating the strength of Su Buling's fist. The whole person flew backwards and broke the stone bridge guardrail behind him. Before falling, he hooked the stone pillar of the guardrail with his toes and flipped back lightly. It was a short confrontation, but it was full of dangers. Su Buling's heart beat very fast, and a few beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. He stared at the black shadow that merged with the night and raised his hand to signal Ning Yuhi to move away. Ning Yuhi's face was pale. It might be the first time in his life that he met such a strong opponent. He had no power to resist. He did not show off his strength at the moment. He handed the sword to Su Buling and carefully retreated from the stone bridge from the way he came. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 374. The night rain was pouring on the top of the stone bridge. Su Buletinling held his long sword and pointed it diagonally at the ground. Rainwater fell from the edge of the sword, and his eyes were extremely cautious and focused. The black shadow was seriously injured by the punch just now, but his hands did not tremble at all. He took out another dagger from his waist, bowed like a cheetah ready to attack, and stared at Su Buling. "You can't kill me, why don't you leave?" Su Buletinling's chest was trembling, but his eyes didn't change. He just stared at the other party lightly. If the black shadow wanted to leave, he would have already left after being knocked off the stone bridge just now. Since he didn't leave, he must be determined to fight to the death. At this time, he didn't say a word and moved slightly on his toes. Su Buletinling's eyes narrowed, and he took action in advance to strike first, but he never thought that there was another sound of strings coming from behind, heading straight for his lower back. Having already seen the power of this thing, Su Buling immediately turned the edge of his sword and struck at the back. At this moment, the black shadow stepped on the stone bridge with both feet, and the whole person turned into an after-image. The 2 daggers reached Su Buling's throat and heart at an incredible speed. Ning Yuhi screamed, completely unexpected that this killer was so cunning. The sword slashed backwards and opened the middle door. It was extremely difficult to block the assassin who was going all out. It was too late for her to support him. At the critical moment, Su Buling threw away his sword again to block the iron wire behind his back. He made fists with both hands and accurately held the black shadow's wrist. His shoulder directly hit the black shadow's arms and hit him with a stick. "Go out." Su Buling went all out and didn't hold back at all. This was not something ordinary people could resist. The black shadow spurted a mouthful of blood on the face towel, and flew backwards again. The tip of his shoe kicked Su Buling's neck in mid-air, and a sharp blade popped out from the top of the boot. Su Buletinling reacted very quickly. He didn't waste time to follow up and hit the target. He quickly dodged sideways, and the toe of his shoe almost grazed the underside of his neck. If he was too late, his throat would be cut. Bang! The shadow broke several more sections of the guardrail, but still stabbed the bridge with the dagger and turned over, standing in the rain staring at Su Buling. Su Buletinling's forehead was covered with cold sweat, and he was sure to kill every move. If he hadn't been the one standing here today, he would have died more than a dozen times. His opponent was incredibly strong. But after all, people are not invulnerable. There are almost no people in the world who can still stand after being hit twice. The black shadow was obviously at the end of his strength. He was holding the dagger up and down. He hesitated for a moment and then rushed forward again. Unfortunately, as soon as he took 2 steps, he fell to the ground and the dagger fell out. Until now, the black shadow had not made any sound. Su Buling wiped the cold sweat and rain from his forehead with his sleeve, picked up the umbrella from the ground, opened it, walked closer carefully, lowered his head and looked at it. "Who are you? Who sent you?" When Ning Yuhi saw his opponent lying down, he trotted up to him, his face turned pale and he was still frightened. The black figure was as slender as a woman, lying on the rain-covered stone bridge. After a moment of silence, she coughed twice and spoke for the first time. "Don't go to Changxingkang. There are assassins ambushing you, who are more powerful than me." Su Buling and Ning Yuhi both frowned when they heard this. They didn't believe the assassin's words at all. It wasn't that they didn't believe there were assassins in Changxingkang, but they didn't believe there were assassins more powerful than this woman in the world. There are probably only a few people in the world who can beat Su Buling to the point where cold sweat breaks out on his forehead. The shadow's voice was very low. After that, he was speechless. He closed his eyes and waited for death. Su Buling felt that the voice sounded familiar. He hesitated for a moment, picked up the sword and held it in his hand. He squatted down in front of the woman and raised his hand to pull away the black cloth covering his face. The woman obviously wanted to struggle, but she could no longer muster the strength. After exposing her cheek, her eyes showed a bit of pleading. "It has nothing to do with my daughter. My son is morally responsible. Killing me is enough." Ning Yuhi looked at Meng Hua and was stunned for a moment, but he was not too surprised. After all, it was too common for Jianghu people to hide in the market. Just thinking about this kind-faced landlady and a little girl, I couldn't help but feel nervous. "Meng Hua, why is it you?" Meng Hua said nothing. Su Buling frowned and thought for a moment. "You know I am moral, why do you want to kill me? Do you have a grudge against me?" Meng Hua breathed weakly. "I didn't want to kill you at first, but later I couldn't beat you. Otherwise, at least one of you will be seriously injured." Su Buling had no doubts about this statement. Just now he heard the sound of the trap. The iron wire was drawn in the direction of his chest and back. Even if he was hit, it would be equivalent to being slashed and he would not die. If you really have murderous intentions, it is obviously more appropriate to aim the iron wire at your neck and calves, and it is also more difficult to dodge. However, stabbing him for no reason was obviously not worthy of forgiveness. This explanation obviously did not work. Looking at the methods just now, you should be the Ghost Empress. You have already retired from the world incognito. The family of 3 is harmonious and beautiful. Why do you want to come out to commit suicide? What will your daughter do in the future? Ning Yuhi's mother died in the hands of the Tang family. Knowing how painful it is to lose a loved one, she really envied Meng Hua's small life of opening a shop with her daughter while eating in a small shop. At this time, she thought about it and interjected. "Your Majesty, forget it, the Ghost Empress is a knight, and she kills corrupt officials." Su Buling raised his hand to stop him and said softly. "A great chivalrous person serves the country and the people, a small chivalrous person serves as a friend or neighbor. I have a clear conscience for what I have done. Why should I be killed by a chivalrous man? What's more, I am the crown prince of Su, and you have done something to me. The sword is meant to kill the 9 clans." Meng Hua was silent for a moment and looked at Su Buling. "My husband-in-law is involved in Dainglu and he is obsessed with it. Please spare his life. I owe you a favor and I will repay you in my next life." Su Buling heard this and understood the reason a little bit, and thought about it. "You are so powerful, why didn't you stop your husband from dying? He doesn't know my identity, and I don't want him to know. Life is not easy now, I have withdrawn from the world. I don't want to step in again, and I don't want this girl to know that her mother has killed people. I have killed many corrupt officials. Know where they hide their money. Do you think it's useful for me to ask for money?" Meng Hua fell silent, hesitated for a long time, and then whispered. "My parents are dead, so I have no one to take care of me." Ning Yuhi pursed his lips and gently pushed Su Buling's shoulder. "As long as we are fine, We must be merciful and merciful. Su Buling shook his head. I am not a good person. Anyone who dares to point a knife at me today will definitely dare to kill me tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow will dare to kill my whole family, so everyone who used a knife on me is dead. You didn't. If your husband dares to take action, you must be murderous. Tell me about your husband's ambush. I will be moral and let you live. It's your choice. Your Majesty. Ningyu, he was obviously a little angry, and raised his hand to push Su Buling. Meng Hua didn't hesitate. Let him live. Master, scare him. Don't let him wander into the world. He can't take this road. His nature is not bad. Su Buling nodded, took out the small bottle from his arms, and poured out a pill. This is dragon locking goo. It can make you recover from your injuries in a short time, but it will kill you after a year. If you eat it, I will let your husband go and let your family of 3 be reunited for a while. Meng Hua took a few breaths, raised her hand hard, stuffed it into her mouth and swallowed. Thank you for your kindness, sir. What weapon does your husband use? The Ringshao knife is 3 feet 6 long. It is hidden on the roof of the second house in Changxingkang. Su Buling sighed, stood up and walked off the stone arch bridge. After thinking for a while, he turned back and said, if your husband disobeys, just give him a beating. It's better than having your family destroyed. You can take care of yourself. Ningyu, he couldn't bear it, but had no choice but to leave with Su Buling. The night rain continued, and the stone bridge became quiet. The figure lying on the ground coughed a few times. After a long time, he slowly got up, picked up the dagger on the ground, thought about it, threw it into the river, and slowly disappeared into the night. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 375. Why did Zheng Zhou cut off the relationship with Dainglu, and Dainglu came to rob him regardless of life or death? Su Buling naturally followed the trend and directly reported it to the official. Several of Dainglu's minions will serve as political achievements for the Yamen. Tomorrow just let the government release the news that he was assassinated by Dainglu. After taking care of Yang Tuyu and others, Nightingale had heard the news and rushed over from the building boat with the palace guards. Nightingale walked up to her, and after making sure that Su Buling was not injured, she said softly, Yang Tuyu and that ghost lady have already targeted you, but they dare to take action even though they know the young master's identity, leaving endless trouble for them. Are you really letting them go? Su Buling raised his hand, that Meng Hua is not strong in a head-to-head confrontation. The assassination method is really powerful and makes people unable to guard against it. It would be a pity to kill her directly. I just gave her a poison to let her live for 1 more year. If Meng Hua, I will honestly retire and wait for death, and tell her that I am the only one in the world who has cured the dragon lock goo. If I want to survive, I will go to Suzhou to find the antidote. If I don't keep my promise and ask around for antidote methods and want to survive, just kill her, little one. Bring the girl back. Young master still has dragon locking goo on him. There is a letter. If not, why should I let her go inexplicably? Nightingale suddenly understood and nodded. Young master wants to see if Meng Hua is honest. What about attacking Yinglu? Dare you plot to assassinate young master? Su Buling shook his head. Dainglu didn't dare to kill me. He just wanted the jade pendant, otherwise he wouldn't have sent just a few miscellaneous fish here. Manzi's father had greeted me in advance, but I gave him a jade pendant. Girl, telling the whereabouts will definitely bring trouble to others, so I deliberately destroyed the jade pendant in front of them, angering them and killing them, and drawing a clear line between me and Dainglu. Nightingale frowned. It's too obvious. I'm afraid Dainglu won't believe it. It doesn't matter whether Dainglu believes it or not. The court knows that I was assassinated by Dainglu and also killed several people on the other side. It just needs to make its position clear. Promise. Nightingale thought for a moment, and after finding no problem, she quietly retreated with the palace guards. Su Buling returned to the stone arch bridge and found Ning Yuhi in the alley. Ning Yuhi stood under the eaves and watched. Seeing Su Buling coming over safely, he breathed a sigh of relief and raised his hand to rub his shoulders. Ning Yuhi's body didn't allow him to be so arrogant. He had just been slapped by Meng Hua, so he must have been injured. Su Buling walked up to him, raised his hand and held Ning Yuhi's wrist, feeling it for a while. Ning Yuhi knew that he was checking her injuries, so he did not avoid it. He said softly, "It's normal to have injuries in the martial arts world. It's okay. Just rest for a few days. Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Su Buling raised his hand and touched Ning Yuhi's shoulder. Ning Yuhi frowned and hid for a moment, obviously in pain. Ning Yuhi couldn't be stripped naked on the street to check his injuries, so he turned around. "I'll carry you back." Ning Yuhi looked at the back of the figure who was half a head taller than her and was slightly stunned. "I injured my shoulder, not my leg. I can walk. Don't be brave and go back to treat your injuries as soon as possible. How about I hug master?" Ning Yuhi was not Mrs. Liu, so she was willing to give in, but she didn't know how to refuse, so she buried her head and wanted to walk into the rain. When Su Buling saw this, he didn't force it. He walked forward and leaned under the oil paper umbrella. After a little hesitation, he still said, "Master, you are too soft-hearted. I thought I was not suitable for the world. Now it seems that you are worse than King Yi." Ning Yuhi did not deny this and sighed softly. "I was born in the Tang family in Yuzhou. I am a concubine. I have no status. I learned martial arts secretly. I worked outside for a while when I was 11 or 12 years old, and then I went back to be the eldest lady, and then I became the queen. After that, I went up the mountain to become a monk, and basically never came down the mountain. I seldom did anything with people. Everyone had wives and children, and they didn't want to kill anyone." Su Buling thought for a moment, "My position is different. Everyone who used the knife on me is dead. Meng Hua is the only exception." Ning Yuhi naturally knew why there was an exception. She rubbed her shoulders and thought for a moment, "My mother was very good to me when I was a child. She was just like the little girl in Yang Ji's shop. She didn't have to think about anything. If anything happened, I would go to my mother. But since my mother died, I feel like the sky has fallen. I just feel sorry for that little girl. Now it seems that the world is meaningless. If I have a daughter, I will definitely stay here and not seek death. Jianghu is not interesting to begin with, and there are not many shopkeepers' son in the world. If master returns to secular life, I will open a big restaurant for you and Manzi in Suzhou and have another daughter." Ning Yuhi pursed his lips slightly, obviously a little moved, but still shook his head. "You and Manzi just have a daughter. She is not a Jianghu person, and she can't take this path. My mother's revenge has not been avenged. It's not that I want to leave the world, it's that I can't leave now. Besides, no one dares to marry me even if I open a restaurant. It's better to be your housekeeper and nurse with Manzi." Su Buletinling was non-committal and just chuckled. Ning Yuhi walked beside Su Buring, thought for a moment, and then sighed, "Meng Hua is stupid too. What kind of man should he be afraid of with such good martial arts skills? If he dares to be disobedient and beaten until he can't stand up, he will naturally be honest." Su Buling glanced at his master. Fists cannot solve problems between families. Besides, the husband is the guide for his wife. Meng Hua quit the world and wants to live an ordinary life as a husband and raise her children. In the homes of common people, a wife must respect her husband. Well, that is, she must let the man she is a good daughter-in-law if she has face, is gentle and obedient, and her husband has the final say whether she lies down or not. Ning Yuhi glanced at him and shook her head after making sure Su Buling's expression was normal. "What do you mean by husband is wife? Husband and wife are husband and wife. They respect each other and support each other. You listen to your husband in everything. You don't care if your husband goes astray. It's understandable that you don't have the ability to manage it. If you have the ability to manage it but don't do anything, what's the point of having this stupid wife? Su Buling spread his hands. Aren't all wives in this world like this? Men like women like this, just like you, Ling Er. If Xiang Er felt that you were wrong that day and didn't listen to her, she would beat you up. You would definitely dislike Xiang Er. Su Buling Ling looked innocent. How could I be such an unreasonable man? As long as I am wrong, I will definitely admit my mistakes. Humph, he can tell the truth, just like the saying honest words are unpleasant to the ears in the court. The emperor likes to let people speak freely and point out mistakes. Few people who dare to point out mistakes have a good ending. On the contrary, those who are good at speaking and flattering are promoted to higher positions. Su Buling really had nothing to refute. Forget it, you will only know this when something happens. It was all empty talk before. Ningyu, he smiled lightly. Ling Er, don't worry about this. No one can beat you. It's good if you don't beat your wife. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 376. While chatting, we came to the boat on the lakeside. Ningyu, he was indeed injured, so he returned to his room after boarding the ship. Zhongli Jiju, as the chief physician on the ship, volunteered to come over and help treat the injury. Ningyu, he wanted to refuse, but he had no reason to refuse, so he sat on the bed and let Zhongli Jiju do it. The injury was on his back and shoulder, and he had to take off his clothes. Naturally, Su Buling couldn't stand by and watch. He came to the corridor to wait, but saw Xiang Er walking over and said with a smile, "Brother Ling, if Hongluan comes to see you for something, just leave it to me." Su Buling thought that the attack just now had disturbed Mrs. Lu, and she was not surprised at all. She raised her hand to hold Xiang Er's face and gave her a few mouthfuls. "Be good, go back to your room and wait, I'll come over later." "Okay." Xiao Xiang Er didn't hide away, and allowed Su Buling to rub him a few times, then watched Su Buling leave, with a hint of cunning flashing in his eyes. When night falls, the lights on the long street by the lake emit a hazy light in the rain. The sound of silk and bamboo passes through the rain and can be heard in the distance from the boats docked on the street. The spacious room was filled with incense, and candlesticks were placed around it. Winter was about to come, and the doors and windows were closed. There were a few side dishes on the small round table, and 2 pots of wine and cups were placed beside the table. Mrs. Lu was sitting in front of the dressing table, still wearing gorgeous makeup, and her red lips were as red as lacquer, which was quite attractive. Looking at the beautiful woman in the bronze mirror, Mrs. Lu raised her hand several times to take off the hairpin and change back to her previous makeup, but she was a little hesitant. After all, the person in the mirror was really good looking. Just like Mrs. Lu likes to praise Su Buling for her beautiful dress, when she dresses beautifully, she naturally wants to be praised or appreciated by others. It may be a bit vain, but people are always a little thoughtful. She is Su Buling's elder, and she has nothing to do with it. It doesn't seem to matter if she lets Ling Er take a look and give a few compliments. Mrs. Lu just hesitated back and forth. When there was a knock on the door, "Aunt Lu," a familiar voice appeared. She had no chance to change her clothes. She immediately straightened her clothes, looked dignified and steady, stood up and walked to the table. "Your Majesty, come in." Her words were calm, but her heart was pounding. She obviously felt that the makeup was a bit too bright and did not suit her status as an elder, and she was afraid that Su would be dissatisfied or not look good. The door opened, and Su Buling walked in as usual. He looked up and saw the somewhat coquettish Mrs. Lu in the room, and was slightly stunned. Mrs. Lu's heart tightened. She made her usual demure gesture, and asked doubtfully, "What's the matter?" Su Buling blinked his eyes were pure and flawless, and he looked back and forth from head to toe several times. "Aunt Lu's outfit is very nice. Is it Xiang'er's work?" Seeing that Su Buling's expression showed no surprise as before, Mrs. Lu was secretly relieved, but also a little disappointed. She sat down at the table and smiled softly. "It's okay to be on the boat during the day. Let Miss Zhongli and Xiang'er practice. Dress up casually." Su Buling sat down next to Mrs. Lu, thought for a while, and took a deep breath in Mrs. Lu's ear. This action was obviously very ambiguous, but the two of them had sniffed each other in the past. Mrs. Lu was used to it, and she even raised her hand to smell her sleeve. "Is Xiang'er's fragrance powder too strong? I still think the peony scent is better." "Not bad, it fits well." After Su Buling sniffed it for a few times, he sat up straight and picked up the chopsticks. Mrs. Lu picked up the wine bottle prepared by Xiao Xiang'er and filled Su Buling's glass. "I heard that something happened on the road just now. Who is so bold? It's too lawless. Do you want me to say hello to King Chu?" Su Buling had never let Mrs. Lu come into contact with such matters of fighting and killing, so he naturally said casually, "A few little blind thieves have been sent to the government." As he said this, he picked up the wine glass and prepared to take a sip. He brought it to his mouth and frowned. The medicine prepared by Zhongli Chuchu was really colorless and odorless. Su Buring couldn't smell the medicine, but he could smell the wine. "I drank this wine with Xiang'er last time. It was too bland and not to my liking." After saying that, he gave the wine glass to Mrs. Lu, took off the tea green wine gourd from her waist, and poured herself a glass of strong wine. "Have you ever drank with Xiang'er?" Xiang'er said she didn't dare to speak. Mrs. Lu blinked, a little confused. She had already drank. Why would Xiang'er make up such a lot of stories? Too busy? Mrs. Lu naturally couldn't figure out the cause and effect. She was planning to persuade Su Buling to drink this big tonic wine today, but if she had already drank it, Xiang'er didn't tell her the dosage. What if she overdid it? After a little hesitation, Mrs. Lu thought it would be better to ask Xiang'er later, so she said nothing more. Since Su Buling left Chang'an City, there have been very few times when the two of them ate at the same table. At this time, he put aside the messy things, picked up the wine glass and said softly, "I'll look for my senior sister tomorrow. If I don't find her, I'll set off. When we get to Jiangnan, it won't be as boring as on the ship." Mrs. Lu picked up the wine glass, touched it with Su Buling, covered her face with her sleeves and drank it all in one gulp. "I'm not in a hurry. If you want to go shopping, you can go shopping. Before leaving, King Su also told you to hang around more. Once you marry Miss Xiao and return to Suzhou City, it will not be easy to come out again." Su Buring chuckled lightly, knowing that Mrs. Lu had a poor drinking tolerance, so he picked up the bottle of sake and filled the glass again. The wine was brought by Xiang'er. Madame Lu knew that both men and women could drink it. She didn't drink much anyway, so she was accompanying Su Buling to dinner, so she naturally didn't feel bad about having a few glasses of wine. After the two drank a few cups, Mrs. Lu, as usual, served Su Buling some dishes and talked about the trivial things on the boat. It took several months to travel thousands of miles, and the boat was boring. After a few words, they found that there was nothing to talk about. Su Buling knew that it was not easy to take a boat every day. After a brief arrangement of the itinerary, he said, "The Jianghu is boring, different from what I imagined, and nothing will get better. After seeing the mountains and rivers, it's just like that. After a few days, I will go to Yuelu Mountain and go directly to Jiangnan. It will take half a month to go downstream. Mrs. Lu still looked unhurried and smiled. Go find Miss Song? If you find her, will you bring her back to the boat, or what? Uh. Su Buling thought for a while. It depends on Song Yufu. I just went there to meet her as scheduled. Mrs. Lu frowned slightly and glanced at Su Buling. Auntie is not jealous, and she won't chase Miss Song off the boat. Just say it directly. Auntie is not jealous. Su Buling was stunned when he picked up the wine glass, and turned his head to look at Madame Lu, but saw that Madame Lu had no reaction, as if it was just a slip of the tongue. So you know you are a jealous person. Su Buling secretly laughed a little, and naturally did not say it out loud, and said seriously. Well, I definitely want to bring her on board, but Grandpa Song Yufu is a bit powerful. It depends on whether he lets his granddaughter go. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 377. Mrs. Lu drank a few glasses of sake into her throat, her cheeks were stained with a blush, and she snorted softly. My daughter is so handsome and holds a high position. No matter how powerful the old man is, he can't be more powerful than the vassal king. He will definitely be let go. This is the ship. It can't be loaded anymore. When we get to Jiangnan, Miss Xiao will find you. If you bring a boatload of girls with you to propose marriage, you will definitely not be allowed in. His tone was sour, and he was obviously speaking his mind, using Miss Xiao as a shield. Su Buletinling blushed and said with a smile, Aunt Lu was the one who helped me get along. I am the prince of a vassal, and it is normal for me to have several women around me. Mrs. Lu frowned slightly and poked Su Buling's chest with her finger. You still have the nerve to ask me to agree? It's a good thing that I didn't throw them off the boat. I've told you before in the capital that you have a high position and should be careful about the beautiful women outside. You also promised that if there is anyone you like, girl, bring her here for me to see first, and the result is good. I took her directly to my home. Those girls didn't even offer me a cup of tea. Serve tea. Normally, the young ones would come in and serve tea to the eldest lady. Of course, it can also be understood as serving tea to the elders. Su Buling blinked his eyes and felt that Mrs. Lu was very relaxed today. She was probably a little drunk after drinking 2 glasses of wine, so he was not surprised and chuckled softly. Hasn't Aunt Lu read them all? If you say you don't like that, I'll kick her out now. What nonsense are you talking about? Mrs. Lu was a little dissatisfied. I am not an ignorant person. If I really ask you to drive away the woman you like, you must remember to hate me. How could it be possible? Aunt Lu would never let me chase people away. Mrs. Lu was now a little satisfied. She supported her cheek with her hands and put her elbows on the table, looking at Su Buling's profile. Ling-er, when I was in the capital, I thought you weren't a womanizer. Now that you've become such a lecherous person, I feel quite guilty. Erotic. Su Buling held the wine glass, hesitating a little and feeling helpless. Aunt Lu, the sage said that food, sex, and love for beauty are common to everyone, and it's only love that ends with etiquette. It's normal for me to like girls. How can you call him a womanizer? Mrs. Lu's eyes were slightly dissatisfied. You are still pretending that you are more interested in love than etiquette. I don't believe it for a long time. Your nature is lustful. On New Year's Eve, you were drunk, fierce, and domineering, and you were simply disrespectful. Su Buling was caught off guard and almost choked to death on his wine. He coughed and pretended to be pure and innocent. Is there any? Yes, you won't remember it if you're drunk. Mrs. Lu dragged the round stool under her buttocks and sat a little closer. She gave a very serious lesson. You were drunk that day, and you pushed me on the bed. You even moved your hands and feet, and even untied my clothes. If I hadn't bit you, nothing would have happened. Fortunately, I am your aunt. If you were a girl from an innocent family, you would have to throw yourself into a well, and you must never get drunk again. Facing Mrs. Lu's serious eyes, Su Buling's handsome face was filled with embarrassment and he nodded to admit his mistake. Well, yeah, I will definitely pay attention to it in the future, as long as Aunt Lu doesn't blame me. You're drunk, how could I blame you? Mrs. Lu sighed faintly, and actually raised her hand to hold the bulging skirt, but then, I saw your true nature clearly. You are really scary when you are drunk, and your hands are very skillful. I have never been raped by a man before. I touched it, and I was blinded at the time. From then on, I dreamed about it every night. Su Buling took a deep breath, looked at the charming face so close, and after making sure that Mrs. Lu had no objection, he got a little closer and put his hand on her lower back. Really? I can't remember exactly, how does Aunt Lu feel? Feel? Mrs. Lu's face turned red. She glanced left and right to make sure there was no one around, then she got a little closer and leaned into Su Buling's ear. It feels so comfortable, just like what's written in the book. Well, I feel so happy. Su Buling's blood surged up, and his nosebleed almost spurted out. He didn't expect the conservative and dignified Mrs. Lu to be so seductive. Yet, Su Buling knew that Mrs. Lu might be drunk. After much hesitation, he still didn't dare to take action. He smiled and said, Aunt Lu, are you drunk? I'll help you take a rest. Mrs. Lu frowned slightly, feeling a little dissatisfied. I only had a few glasses of wine, how could I get drunk? I'm just telling you what's in my heart, and if you don't want to hear it, forget it. Willing to listen. Su Buling actually felt a little guilty. He put his hand on Mrs. Lu's lower back with an unnatural expression. Mrs. Lu didn't notice, so she picked up Su Buling's wine glass and put it to his mouth. Sienna also said that you are very powerful, especially good at bullying. I haven't seen any other women before you. Where did you learn this? Su Buling opened her mouth and drank it all in one gulp. I learned from Lao Xiao's the jade tree in the spring palace, Aunt Lu really feels very comfortable. Mrs. Lu nodded, raised her hand and rubbed it herself. I tried it a few times myself, but there was no reaction. Su Buling took a breath, slid his right hand up slowly and quietly, and pinched it gently. Is that so? Mrs. Lu's face was frighteningly red, and her body softened as she leaned on Su Buling, her voice as if from a distant orchid. I used more force at that time, that is. It might be hard to describe, so she unbuttoned the cloth buttons of her palace skirt, revealing the peony belly band underneath, and directly opened the warm white belly band, which was white, and took Su Buling's hand and placed it on it. The palm of her hand was soft and tender, and the feeling was indescribable. Su Buling's heart beat like a drum, and his breathing was obviously heavier. He forced himself to calm down. So that's how it is. Very gentle, but her hands were shaking a little bit. Mrs. Lu closed her eyes, bit her lower lip lightly, and pressed Su Buling's palm. Yes, I was scared at that time. Su Buling didn't want to listen, and he was completely confused. He knew that Mrs. Lu was drunk and couldn't do anything wrong, but he couldn't suppress his nature. After a long struggle in his mind, he still mustered up the courage to lean over and kiss the red lips. The four lips were pressed together, so soft and moist that even the sound of rain outside seemed to have stopped. Mrs. Lu, who had been repeating the last situation, stiffened slightly, opened her eyes, and was awakened by this unprecedented shock. What am I doing? Woo-woo. Mrs. Lu's slightly blurred eyes suddenly turned into shock and shame. She raised her hand and patted Su Buling's shoulder in panic, struggling to turn her head away, breathing rapidly, and was somewhat unbelievable. Ling you are so presumptuous. Su Buling was stunned. How could he change his face faster than turning a page? Mrs. Lu's mind was blank, and her reason gradually recovered. She recalled the messy words and things she had just said. In the scream, her face flushed and she closed her collar, almost incoherent. You, Ling how could you do this? Su Buling was bewildered, and had no idea what was going on. He could only say, Aunt Lu, it's you, you're drunk. You know I'm drunk, but you still. Mrs. Lu's tears came out, and she stood up in a hurry to straighten her dress. She was so embarrassed that she couldn't even think. She stamped her feet lightly and raised her hand to pat Su Buling on the back. Get out quickly. The voice was a bit sobbing, and the words were not clear. Su Buling wanted to pretend to be drunk to get away with it, but Mrs. Lu obviously remembered what happened just now. She had taken the initiative to this point, so pretending to be drunk was obviously inappropriate, so she raised her hand and held Mrs. Lu's arm. Hongluan. Pa, I'm your aunt. Get out quickly. Mrs. Lu was so anxious that she cried, and she was incoherent and pushed Su Buling out with force. It was just one step away. Su Buling obviously wanted to break the window paper directly. He comforted her softly. We haven't finished the meal yet, Aunt Lu, don't get excited. Mrs. Lu was panicked and felt ashamed to see people. She was unwilling to sit down and chat with Su Buling. She raised her hand to pick up the wine bottle and wine gourd on the table and threw them at Su Buling. Go out. Otherwise I will jump into the lake. The wine bottle and gourd flew over. Su Buling raised his hand to catch it. Seeing that Mrs. Lu was about to get angry, he had no choice but to leave the room. Mrs. Lu hurriedly closed the door and inserted the bolt. She trembled and warned, Don't tell anyone, I was drunk just now, and my nonsense should not be taken seriously. Su Buling was almost hit in the face by the door. He stood in the corridor with his hands spread out, feeling a little lost and innocent, but then he thought that Aunt Lu's first kiss belonged to him. It was quite sweet, really big. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 378. Aunt Lu, please rest early. I'm going back first and will come to see you tomorrow morning. Naturally, there was no response from behind the door, and I didn't know what he was thinking. Su Buling waited for a while and saw that Mrs. Lu did not make any drastic move. He couldn't help but feel a little calmer. Anyway, he had kissed and touched her. It would be better to let Mrs. Lu calm down and face the reality first. Being too hasty will only lead to counterproductive. Thinking of this, Su Buling stopped disturbing him and turned around to bully the baby to relieve his anger. Just after taking a few steps, he saw Zhongli Jiju walking out of Ning Yuhi's room and carrying a basin of water towards the outside of the building. He must have just treated Ning Yuhi's injury. Su Buling was still a little worried about Ning Yuhi's injury, so he put aside his charming moment, walked outside the cabin, and said, Miss Zhongli, how is Master's injury? Zhongli Jiju poured the water on the corridor outside the cabin with a slight smile on her lips. I injured my shoulder, it's not serious, but I'll have to rest for half a month. When she raised her eyes and saw Su Buling holding a drink, she thought he came here specifically to find her, and raised her eyebrows slightly. What, Mr. Su wants to invite me to drink? Even though he was here, he hadn't finished his drink just now, so Su Buling threw the bottle to Zhongli Jiju. Yes. Lanterns were hung under the eaves of the building. Under the dim light, Zhongli Jiju was wearing a long aqua dress with exquisite makeup. She caught the wine bottle and put down the tub, nodding slightly. Master Su is now interested. How have you considered the matter of recruiting disciples that I mentioned last time? Su Buring lifted the wine gourd, and then took a sip himself. I've been a little busy lately, so I haven't thought about it yet. The master doesn't seem to be too happy about it. Zhongli Jiju picked up the bottle and took a sip, with a calm expression and a gentle smile. The rules of the sect cannot be changed. The medicinal materials to warm and nourish the young master's body have been prepared. If the young master wants to think clearly, it is better to give an answer as soon as possible. I can teach not only the practice of medicine, but also many other methods. The young master will definitely benefit a lot. Shallow. Su Buling had already seen that Zhongli Jiju was very capable, so he didn't question it, but he was a little strange. I've seen Zhongli Chuchu, who only knows how to use poisonous needles, but doesn't seem to have much other skills. Didn't you leave it to her? Zhongli Jiju probably doesn't drink much on weekdays, so after one sip of wine, his face turned red. I have taught you some methods, and they are all life-saving methods. The fighting and killing in the arena are too ruthless. I don't want Chu Chu to get involved. Then she doesn't seem to listen to you very much. Zhongli Jiju was silent for a moment and sighed faintly. Chu Chu was originally very obedient, but she just had a simple mind. I said the wrong thing again, so she didn't want to see me. Su Buring was stunned and jumped directly to the fence and sat down. She doesn't want to see you? What's going on? Zhongli Jiju's eyes showed a bit of disappointment, and he shook his head and said, I snatched Chu Chu from the brothel. My original intention was to use her to win the top prize and compete with Ning Qingyi. But I really treat her as my own daughter. I have protected her since she was a child, hoping that she would become the happiest girl in the world and not have to be wronged everywhere like me. Later she heard some rumors and asked me, do I want her to be the Bakui to compare with Ning Yu, so I treat her so well. I treated her as my daughter. I never thought she would be angry, and I really wanted to be my apprentice with Ning Yu, so I said the wrong thing. But I really didn't mean that, I was just a little selfish. If she didn't want to, I would definitely not force her, and I would still treat her as my apprentice's daughter. I even admitted it when she got angry and scolded me and hit me, but I didn't expect it. She left and never saw me again. She and I have been dependent on each other for many years, and I never had the chance to apologize. Speaking of this, Zhongli Jiju felt really sad and aggrieved, like an elder who had been misunderstood by a close relative, with misty eyes. With his true feelings revealed, Su Buling sighed softly and comforted. It's just a small misunderstanding. It will be solved after a few explanations when we meet. But, Miss Zhongli still wants to compete with Yu He. I'm not competing with her, it's mine. Zhongli Jiju turned his head and said, I just like that little bit of fame. Everyone in the world doesn't strive for fame and wealth, but there are a few women in the world who don't want to be the eighth leader. Is it wrong for me to fight for it myself? Su Buling shook his head, of course it's true. There was a bit of unwillingness in Zhongli Jiju's eyes. Su Danking had promised me back then, and I didn't want to harm him. I just used some small tricks. I also regarded him as a gentleman who would do what he said, but he fooled me. Then you should go find trouble with Su Danking. I can't find him. He's just like a tortoise. He just disappears when he says he's not there. Zhongli Jiju was a little annoyed. She raised her finger and pointed at her face. If I can't find Su Danking, I will naturally find Ning Yu He, the most beautiful woman in the world. Sister, how am I worse than her? Why is she the most beautiful woman? I'm nothing. She's already a monk and she's still holding her position, so I'm definitely going to cause trouble for her. It was the first time that Su Buling saw the fairy-like Zhongli Jiju showing such a savage and aggressive look. He felt that Zhongli Jiju was a little excited and chuckled. Well, Miss Zhongli is naturally not inferior to any other woman, but it's just a bit. If they don't give it to me, I naturally have to get it myself. Zhongli Jiju put one hand on her waist and walked up and down in front of Su Buling, speaking seriously. I look as good as Ning Yu He, and I want to be the eighth leader. I can't wait for fame to come to my door. I should strive for it myself, right? That's right, you have to fight for the opportunity. I'm not harming anyone. Ning Yuhi has become a monk and has no use for her reputation. She is also dragged down by her reputation. I will go to her door to reason with her and ask her to give up her reputation to me. Is there any problem? No problem, but it's a bit too much for you to ask her to tell the world that you are the most beautiful woman in the world. Zhongli Jiju ran to Su Buling and stared at him with a pair of fox eyes. It's not nonsense. She gave her name to me. Who knows if she doesn't tell the world? I just asked her to help her say a word, but she got angry and kicked me out. I came to her to beg her sincerely. Naturally also angry. I'm going to use small tricks to disturb master later, and that's a bit. Zhongli Jiju spread his hands with a clear conscience. What are small tricks? Evergreen Mountain belongs to the imperial court. I raise some small animals on the mountain. They don't bite people and I don't enter Changqing Temple. Does it have anything to do with Ning Yuhi? Well. Su Buling thought about it carefully. That's what I said. Then it doesn't matter, you admit it, right? Zhongli Jiju jumped up to the fence and sat on her side, looking very serious. I live on the mountain and I'm not allowed to take a bath? I'm not allowed to take a bath in a wild pool? I have itchy skin and I like to put itching powder in the water. Is there a problem? Ning Yuhi ran over. Drive me away and jump in to take a wild bath. Can you blame me? Su Buletinling forced himself to hold back his smile and nodded. No problem at all. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 379. That's it? Zhongli Jiju picked up the wine bottle and took a big sip. Her face turned red, maybe because she felt a little stuffy. She raised her hand and pulled up her collar to let some air out, revealing the white patch of snow under her collarbone and the ravine between the ridges. I just used normal means and let the government judge and find no fault. Why did Wudane Mountain chase me away? Chendeazai also pointed a sword at me. It's because they are unreasonable, right? With a startling glance, a hint of pink was visible. Su Buling coughed slightly and turned his eyes to the street on the shore. Yes, but hasn't the girl already thought about it? I want to be angry? I live for one breath, why should I swallow my anger? Zhongli Jiju puffed up her chest slightly. Sister, I am not worse than her, I just want to compete with her. If Wudangshan interferes in my good deeds, okay, I, Zhongli Jiju, have been fighting with her in this life, she will accept it. I will accept a better apprentice as my apprentice. When she gets married, I will seduce her man. I will snatch whoever she likes. Su Buling took a breath, then Sister Jiju will accept me as her apprentice. Of course it's to compete with her. Zhongli Jiju got angry when she said this, and looked at Su Buling. I finally raised Chu Chu, and compared with Ning Qingyi, she turned around and accepted you as her apprentice. I searched all over and couldn't find you. A man who is more powerful than you will naturally have no choice but to compete with her. Oh! Su Buletinling suddenly realized. After saying this, he had figured out many of the puzzles he had after getting acquainted with Zhongli Jiju. Zhongli Jiju's eyes were a bit eager. Mr. Su, if you accept me as your master, I will teach you everything, but I have to be the master, and Ning Yuhi can only be the second child. Is that okay? Su Buling tilted his head slightly and said, you said that? Expression. Their eyes met, and the corridor fell silent. Zhongli Jiju looked at Su Buling eagerly, waiting for Su Buling's answer. After waiting for a long time, Su Buling didn't speak. Then he thought about why he didn't agree to her, and then, he realized the current situation. Zhongli Jiju's face froze, and he instantly realized that he had been hit. The wine was poisonous, and she prepared it herself. I just seem to have blurted out all the words without realizing it. The effect of the medicine is really too much. What to do? Zhongli Jiju's heart sank, knowing that something was wrong. But after just a moment, he made a pitiful expression and continued to act coquettishly. Mr. Su, please promise me, sister, please. This time he was awake. Su Buling didn't see the difference. Seeing that Zhongli Jiju made it clear, he felt a little embarrassed. Apprenticeship is a big deal, this is a bit of a joke. Zhongli Jiju jumped off the fence, took out a small porcelain bottle from her waist, and handed it to Su Buling. I'm really capable. I'm not a charlatan. I can definitely teach you a lot, just accept me as your master. Just accept me as your master on the surface. In private, you can call me whatever you want, okay? Su Buling raised his hand to take the small porcelain bottle, put it to his nose and smelled. What's this? Lock dragon goo. Depend on. Su Buling's face turned pale and he almost fell off the fence. He was troubled by the dragon lock goo, so he threw the small porcelain bottle to Zhongli Jiju like he was avoiding snakes and scorpions. How come you have this thing? I raised it, otherwise how would I know how to solve the dragon locking goo? Zhongli Jiju took the small bottle and approached Su Buling. Not only do I know this, I have studied most of the strange poisons in the world, and there are all kinds of messy methods. In a real life and death fight, even the top 10 warriors combined may not be able to do it. But I am qualified to accept you as my apprentice. If there really was dragon locking goo in the bottle, Shi Wukui would definitely go around it. Su Buling's face turned pale and he raised his hand in a panic. Miss Zhongli, calm down. If you do this again, I will do it. I know the solution to the dragon locking goo. If you accidentally poison me, you will bear the consequences. Zhongli Jiju took the small bottle and stamped her foot. How could I poison you? You know the solution. I won't use this to poison you. Mr. Su, just promise me, I will give you the locking dragon goo. Su Buling couldn't resist, and raised his hand. Miss Zhongli, don't be impulsive. Can you let me think about it? Zhongli Jiju pursed her lips, hesitated again and again, then sighed with regret and put away the small porcelain bottle. Young master just doesn't like me. I'm not a bad person. Researching poisons is just a personal hobby. I have never harmed anyone. You can let Ningyu and I be equal masters. Please. Su Buling didn't expect that Zhongli Jiju was still an annoying little goblin. He had no choice but to say seriously. Once a teacher, always a father. We have not known each other for a long time. How about we get along for a while? Zhongli Jiju saw that Su Buling refused to give in, so there was nothing she could do. Okay, master, if you think there is anything bad about me, I will change it. Anyway, I will definitely accept you as my apprentice. Even a superficial master-apprentice is fine. Su Buling nodded. Okay, it's getting late, girl, go back and rest. Zhongli Jiju was a little disappointed, and returned to her previous appearance. She bowed and walked into the cabin. Su Buling sat on the railing for a while, feeling that tonight was a little weird. He still hadn't recovered from Aunt Lu's torture. After thinking for a while, he returned to the bedroom at the stern of the ship. Xiao Xiang who had just entered the room and was sitting on the couch drinking tea, turned around and said doubtfully, "Why are you back so soon? Doesn't it have to be half of the night?" Su Buling frowned slightly, not knowing why. Xiao Xiang reacted and knew that the plan had failed, and quickly smiled. "Aren't you having dinner with Hongluan?" Su Buling just remembered this, shook his head and chuckled. "The one above is full." "Above?" Xiao Xiang blinked her eyes, and wanted to ask about the situation indirectly, but she found that her body sank, and it was her turn below. On the other side, Zhongli Jiju walked slowly into her room, and after making sure that Su Buling's footsteps disappeared, She leaned against the door and breathed a sigh of relief. Finally got away with it. Looking at the small wine bottle in her hand, Zhongli Jiju's eyes were obviously a little annoyed. She took great pains to prepare wine for Xiao Xiang, but she never thought that she would be tricked and blurt out all the words. There was also a strong medicine added in it, and now her body felt like it was on fire. If she didn't just want to accept Su Buling as an apprentice and had no evil thoughts, she would have to confess here tonight. But I have to say that my craftsmanship is really good. Zhongli Jiju took the wine bottle and pondered it for a while. Anyway, her purpose and true appearance have been exposed. It seems that Su Buling is not very disgusted with her. Just take advantage of her. She is not going to hurt anyone. Thinking of this, Zhongli Jiju calmed down for the time being and sat on the bed to feel it carefully. This medicine is really effective, but from her personal experience, she will only want to talk when she is not on guard, and unconsciously reveal her feelings. As long as she finds something wrong, she will wake up on the spot. If you research something good, you must try it. Zhongli Jiju lay on the bed, holding the small wine bottle and thinking for a moment. Her eyes gradually moved to the room where Ning Yuhi lived. She should think I am more beautiful in her heart. She didn't let go of the position back then. Was she jealous of my beauty? I don't believe she is pure and flawless like a little white flower. I have to find a chance to ask. Ask for a monthly ticket at the end of the month. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 380. It was already dark, but the lights were still on in the rooms on the third floor of Yueyang Tower. Mr. Pei sat behind the book and looked at the book in his hand. Zulu was sitting on the Taishi chair in the room, holding a teacup in his hand. There were two people sitting next to him. They were sitting around Zulu. They looked introverted and breathless, with no expression on their faces. There are two people, one old and one young. The old one is Zheng Yushan, the head of the Qingcheng sect in Shu. The land of Shu is steep, easy to defend and difficult to attack, and quite fertile. It used to be a place where people from all walks of life gathered. When Iron Eagle hunted deer, it was naturally a place that was targeted for clearing. The two largest rivers and lakes forces in Shu belonged to Qingcheng Ime. Ime surrendered to the king of Shu and they were all women. They escaped disaster that year. However, the Qingcheng faction was not so lucky and was almost defeated by soldiers and horses on Qingcheng Mountain. Zheng Yushan was the leader. The strong man cut off his wrist and asked Qingcheng Mountain to expel him from the master and become a bandit, so that he could retain a trace of his reputation. As the leader of the Shu area, Zheng Yushan's seniority is higher than that of Zulu. The village where Li Hansheng and Pei Yun used to hide was under Zheng Yushan's protection. Unfortunately, they are now bereaved dogs. The young man sitting on the left side of Zulu is about 25 or 6. He is dressed as a scholar. He is tall and has a face like a crown jewel. He is a bit elegant. He goes by the pseudonym Xiaolu in Dainglu and joins Zulu together. And only Zulu knows his true identity. Although Xiaolu seems to be just an ordinary scholar, Mr. Pei, a staff member of Dainglu, respects him very much. After all, for someone who can walk with Zulu and keep secret about his family, he doesn't need to think about it to know that behind him is a giant that cannot see the light of day. Tap tap tap. After waiting for a long time, footsteps finally sounded outside the room. In a panic, Chang Shijian ran into the house with an unsheathed sword in his hand. After seeing that he was doing such a solid job, he let go of his hanging heart. He looked a little lucky to have escaped and sat directly against the door. On the ground, breathing heavily. The three of them turned their heads and looked at Chang Shijian. Mr. Pei put down the book in his hand and frowned. Something went wrong. Chang Shijian held the sword in his hand, calmed down a little, and then said, "I went to discuss with Su Buling, but I never thought that Su Buling would destroy the jade pendant directly." Zhou Yuan was too reckless and took action directly. Most of the people he took with him died. Xiaolu was holding the teacup, not surprised by the result, and just asked calmly. Zhou Yuan is also dead. Kill with one blow. Chang Shijian felt lingering fear and touched his neck from time to make sure he really ran back alive. Mr. Pei nodded. Zhou Yuan is too reckless. Sooner or later he will do something bad if he stays in the building. If he dies, he will die. The ice flower Furong pendant is not so easy to destroy. He directly kills people without mercy. He probably doesn't want to fight with me in the Eagle Tower. Get involved. Chang Shijian wiped the rain off his face and breathed a sigh of relief. Based on what I saw today, Su Buling doesn't even want to talk about it. How should I get this jade pendant back? Mr. Pei hesitated and looked at the three people in the room. Zulu held the teacup with a dull look. Su Buling and I have no grudges and we won't do anything. The little deer next to him smiled warmly and gently spread his hands. I may not be able to beat Su Buling. Seeing this, Mr. Pei had no choice but to look at Zhen Yushan, who was sitting inside. Zhen Yushan had grey hair and looked like an ordinary old man. He thought for a moment. Fighting is afraid of young people. In the world of martial arts, it is always the wave behind who beats the wave in front. It is unwise to single-handedly challenge the young leader. Seeing this, Mr. Pei said no more and instead said, Su Buletinling took action directly today to show that he is against me at Eagle Tower. He may also intervene in dealing with the CAO family at this time. I wanted to wait until Su Buletinling left Yueyang before taking action. Depending on the situation, there is no point in waiting. I will leave directly for CAO tomorrow. Family, if Su Buletinling steps in to stop me, I hope the three of you can get the jade pendant back easily. Zulu nodded lightly. I'm dealing with the CAO family, it doesn't matter who comes. The other two people also nodded. The morning light shone in the east, the heavy rain that had been falling for many days stopped, and the long-lost sun appeared on the water of Dongting Lake, dispersing the hazy mist. After a rain, the weather became noticeably colder. Su Buling felt his hands and feet were cold while he was sleeping, and his chest was a little tight, and he slowly woke up. The small bedroom was extremely quiet, and you could faintly hear the shouts from the lakeside streets. Looking down, he saw that the quilt was in a mess, and the sleeping Xiang'er was lying on his chest like a cat. The quilt was wrapped tightly, and he didn't take care of his husband at all. The chest was soft and warm. Su Buling raised his hand. After all, he was reluctant to push the baby down. He lowered his head and took a closer look. Aunt Lu had been tossing her so much last night, so she didn't spare Xiang'er's life when she came back. They had been sleeping in the same bed with each other for so long, and they weren't as restrained as before. They were more relaxed, and they even forgot when they fell asleep. At this time, Xiang'er was sleeping soundly, but in her sleep she still had her eyebrows furrowed, her eyelashes trembling slightly, and her face carrying a somewhat mature charm, with a majestic attitude of the Queen Mother. She must be looking for a place to deal with him in her dream. He held the small mahogany sign tightly in his hand. The words "Write on, write on, write on, write on, write, write on, write down" were almost fully engraved on it. Su Buling looked at it carefully for a moment, feeling a little tempted to laugh. He looked around, took out the golden quail egg placed under the pillow, stuffed it under the quilt, and then, "Oh, it's so cold." Xiao Xiang'er was startled and woke up instantly. She propped up her upper body in a daze, with a bit of irritation in her eyes. She met Su Buling's eyes. After a moment, she woke up. Her face suddenly sank, and Su Buling looked a little annoyed. "Not even getting hit? You're not done yet, are you?" Looking at the turbulent waves in front of him, Su Buling raised his eyebrows slightly and looked up and down. Xiao Xiang'er felt something, her face turned red, and she quickly turned around and wrapped herself tightly, and said in a muffled voice, "Don't touch me, go find your aunt," I said. "I'm here to detoxify you, we haven't gotten married yet, and you're getting more and more unbridled." The baby can only be fierce at this time. Su Buling naturally doesn't care. He opened the curtain, got up and dressed neatly, and went to the side room to wash up. Su Buling is used to being alone, never letting the maid serve him. Standing on the terrace brushing his teeth, suddenly saw the little nightingale running over, his face a little strange. "Sir, Madame Lu and Yunu ran away secretly." "Huh?" Su Buling frowned. Nightingale stood in front of him, imitating Su Buling's appearance, spreading her hands and saying, "Before dawn, I heard a rustling sound next door. I got up and took a look, and saw Madame Lu carrying a small package and preparing to go out with Yunu. Her eyes were red, as if she was in a bad mood. I asked Madame where she was going, but she didn't say anything. She told me not to follow her and not to tell you, and then she left. I asked the guards to follow her secretly." After rinsing his mouth, Su Buling put the couple toothbrush made by Xiang'er in the cup. "Why didn't you say it earlier?" Nightingale blinked her big eyes, very innocently. "Madam didn't let me say it. If I said it in advance, Madam would definitely know that I was the informant. I am just the young master's maid, and I have to know the rules." Su Buling naturally knew why Madame Lu ran away from home, and he didn't delay at the moment. After asking where she was going, he got off the boat and chased her.